The outperformance was driven by M&A transactions. We had 5 deals in that 6-month period, and we've had 5 deals actually since the interim end as well. So M&A has definitely been a driver for outperformance.
Hello, you're watching ProAct. I'm joined by Ailsa and Marek, co-lead fund managers of International Biotechnology Trust. Ailsa, Marek, very good to speak with you. I'll start with you, Ailsa. IBT outperformed the Nasdaq Biotechnology Index over the 6 months to February. What were the key drivers behind that outperformance?
Yes, and thank you for having us back, Stephen. So we this morning announced our interim results to end of February, as you say, and the fund was up 35.7% in NAV terms and 39% in share price terms versus our benchmark, the Nasdaq Biotech Index, up just shy of 30%. The outperformance was driven by M&A transactions. We had 5 deals in that 6-month period, and we've had 5 deals actually since the interim end as well. So M&A has definitely been a driver for outperformance. And we've also just seen the normal effects of great clinical advancements for our companies and strong number of FDA approvals within our companies. So all those factors have compounded and meant that we've outperformed our benchmark really nicely.
Well, Marek, as Ailsa said, M&A activity was strong with those 5 acquisitions in the first 6 months, a further 5 since your interim end. How strong does the takeover pipeline look from here?
We've been very fortunate to have 5 acquisitions in this calendar year. But going back 5 years, we have had approximately 40 deals being acquired from our portfolio. So this is the normality, so to speak, and the ecosystem, how biotech nowadays works. Pharma has a problematic situation where they need to acquire new projects and products, and biotech is providing that. The last couple of years, 70% of all drugs approved emanated from biotech and not from pharma.
And Marek, where are you currently finding the most attractive valuations and opportunities?
It's a really good question. Where we find the best opportunities at the moment is when the companies have gone through the kind of laborious last phase 3 studies and are on the cusp of getting approved and also being launching their new drug. This is where the area where we find pharma is hunting, and this is where you get the highest premiums and also the highest activity at the moment.
Also, US politics, tariffs, and uncertainty around drug pricing weighed on sentiment last year. How are you assessing the policy risks facing biotech investors over the remainder of 2026?
Yes, so your readers or listeners may remember Liberation Day back in April last year, and biotech was hit as was the whole market. Now, it was quite specific to our sector in that he was also tallying up tariffs with something called MFN, and that is basically bringing drug prices more in parity with European drug prices paid. So that weighed on the sector. And there were also cuts within the regulatory department, the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, and the NIH, the National Institute of Health. All of these factors weighed on biotech and healthcare overall. Now, many of those issues have been put to bed. So major pharma companies have done deals with the US administration in terms of MFN and tariffs. That's very much behind us. And the FDA, still in the headlines. We've got some murmurings over a change in leadership in terms of the FDA commissioner. But otherwise, it really does feel like these political headwinds are now behind us, and hence the recovery we've seen in recent months.
The trust continues to maintain exposure to both quoted and unquoted companies. How do you balance the higher growth potential of private biotech with the liquidity and transparency of listed names, Ailsa?
Yeah, so we have a board of directors because we're a closed-ended fund, and it's their view that they want shareholders to have access to the whole cross-spectrum of the biotech industry, from early ideas coming out of university, venture funds, all the way up to the profitable cash generating companies. So we do this at IBT by having a goal of between 5 and 15% of the fund in unquoted funds, which gives you diversification, and also that going through venture firms that manage those funds and the know-how and the due diligence behind that. At the moment, just at the end of the interim period, it was just over 7% of the fund. So there's no issue there with funding those companies because we've got a huge fund supporting that.
And looking ahead to the second half of the financial year, what are the main catalysts investors should watch for, whether in clinical data, FDA approvals, rate expectations, or sector consolidation?
Lots of them packed into that question. So this sector tends to move with rates. I'll take the last one first. Because you expect cash in the future, because biotech companies are expecting to approve their drug in the future, say 10 years time, for some of them. When you discount those cash flows back at a higher rate, then the valuations will fall. Now, this is why we saw a longer protracted bear market back in 22, 23, because rates were going up at quite a dramatic rate to reflect rising inflation. Now, we've had a much steadier rate environment since then, which is a good backdrop for our names. We were expecting to see a couple of rate cuts in the US this year. That's in question now, depending on what goes on in the geopolitical risk and environment. But generally, steady rates is a good setup for biotech companies. So we're okay on that front. And then the usual news flows. So last year, we had a really decent number of FDA approvals, 55 new drugs, new chemical entities were approved by the regulator in the US. 70% of them came from biotech companies. We expect, a similar sort of number this year. The IPO window has opened after a long period of barely any new companies coming to market from biotech. So that's another good green flag and outlook for this year. And we expect to have more M&A deals.
Ailsa, Marek, I hope you'll continue to keep us updated with your progress. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you.
That's Ailsa Craig and Marek Poszepczynski, co-lead fund managers of International Biotechnology Trust.